What a second half. Just dominant Philly up in.
Look, there is a very specific, undeniable desperation that comes with facing elimination in the NBA playoffs. When you are down 3-1 in a series, you are effectively standing on the edge of a cliff. The margin for error is entirely gone. Every single missed rotation, every bad pass, every missed free throw feels like it carries the weight of the entire season. And when you are the Philadelphia 76ers, a franchise that has been carrying the agonizing historical baggage of second-round failures and playoff collapses for the better part of a decade, walking into the TD Garden down 3-1 against a historically dominant Boston Celtics team is basically walking into the lion's den wearing a meat suit. The narrative was already written. The obituaries for the Sixers season were already being drafted.
But last night, the Philadelphia 76ers essentially looked at that narrative, tore it to shreds, and delivered an absolute statement. They walked out of Boston with a 113-97 victory to force a Game 6. And honestly, the final score doesn't even fully capture how methodical this win was. They didn't just survive, they fundamentally dictated the terms of engagement for 48 minutes.
There is a growing sentiment across the basketball landscape today that we might be witnessing a significant shift in the psychological dynamic of this matchup. Because when you dissect the tape of Game 5, this wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just anomalous shooting variance where the Sixers hit 25 fluky threes. It was a complete structural execution by their biggest stars in the biggest possible moment.
And naturally, any conversation about the Philadelphia 76ers has to start with the big fella. We have to talk about Joel Embiid.
Coming into this game, everyone knew exactly what the national conversation was going to be this morning if the Sixers had lost. It would have been the same tired discourse. Embiid is too tired. He can't handle the physical toll of the playoffs. His body breaks down against Boston. But Embiid absolutely refused to let that happen. He finished with 33 points, but the stat that should completely terrify the Boston Celtics coaching staff is the 8 assists.
33 points and 8 assists. Embiid shot 12 of 23 from the floor and 9 of 10 from the free throw line. But if you actually go back and watch the offensive possessions, the sheer level of processing speed he displayed was mesmerizing. The Celtics, as they always do, tried to throw multiple defensive looks at him. They had Neemias Queta battling him in the post, trying to use his physicality and 14 rebounds to wear Embiid out. They sent late digs from the baseline. They tried to aggressively trap him at the nail.
In previous years, when faced with that kind of chaotic, swarming Boston defense, Embiid would occasionally hold the ball too long, put his head down, and force a heavily contested fadeaway, or worse, turn the ball over. Not last night. Last night, he operated with surgical precision. When the double team came, he didn't panic. He kept his head on a swivel and made the simple, correct read every single time. He was operating at the top of the key, utilizing his gravity to suck the defense in, and then immediately whipping passes to cutters or wide-open shooters in the corner. He only had 3 turnovers in 39 minutes of incredibly high-usage basketball against the best defense in the league. That is the hallmark of a superstar who is fully in control of the chessboard. Embiid didn't just physically dominate the Celtics, he intellectually dismantled their defensive scheme.
But Joel Embiid cannot beat the Boston Celtics by himself. We know this. History has proven this time and time again. What makes this 2026 iteration of the 76ers so fascinating is the specific construction of their perimeter, and we desperately need to have a serious conversation about Tyrese Maxey. Maxey finished the game with 25 points, hitting 3 three-pointers. But honestly, the scoring isn't even the most impressive part of his stat line. Tyrese Maxey pulled down 10 rebounds. I want you to really think about that. Your 6'2" point guard, playing in a hostile road environment in an elimination game, goes out and grabs double-digit rebounds against a massive physical Boston frontcourt. That is the ultimate indicator of effort. That is the kind of sheer, unrelenting hustle that defines playoff basketball.
Maxey's speed is the great equalizer in this series. Whenever Embiid secured a defensive rebound, Maxey was shot out of a cannon. He put constant, terrifying downhill pressure on the Celtics' transition defense. Boston's defenders were scrambling, constantly backpedaling, and because they were so terrified of Maxey getting to the rim, it opened up secondary trailing opportunities for the rest of the roster. Maxey's 25 points and 10 rebounds provided the emotional heartbeat for this team. He refused to let their season end.
And then there is the Paul George factor. When Daryl Morey pushed his chips to the center of the table to bring Paul George to Philadelphia, this exact scenario is what he had in mind. In a do-or-die Game 5, you don't necessarily need Paul George to go out and score 40 points. You have Embiid and Maxey for the heavy offensive lifting. What you need is the ultimate high IQ connective tissue, and that is exactly what PG provided. George finished with 16 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists. He was an absolute stabilizing force. When the offense bogged down, he was there to knock down 4 massive three-pointers. He initiated offense when Maxey needed a breather. He navigated the mid-range flawlessly, but his most significant contribution was on the defensive end. He was navigating screens, switching onto Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown seamlessly, and using his length to completely disrupt Boston's passing lanes. His plus 19 in the box score was the highest of any starter, and it reflects exactly how vital he is to the structural integrity of this team. He doesn't have to be the alpha dog, he just has to be the perfect supplementary star, and he played that role flawlessly.
And speaking of supplementary pieces, we cannot ignore the absolute wild card of this game, Quentin Grimes. Every single deep playoff run features a game where an unexpected role player just catches fire and swings the momentum of a series. Last night, that guy was Quentin Grimes. Coming off the bench to play 24 minutes, Grimes dropped 18 points, shooting 5 of 8 from the floor and a scorching 4 of 7 from beyond the arc. And he was a staggering plus 18 while on the floor.
When you are playing the Boston Celtics, you have to match their mathematical output. Boston is going to shoot a ton of threes, and you have to have guys who can punish them when they overhelp on Embiid. Grimes was stepping into his shots with zero hesitation. Every time the Celtics went on a mini run and the TD Garden crowd started to get loud, the ball would swing to Grimes in the corner or on the wing, and he would just casually bury a three to completely silence the building. That kind of fearless bench junction is backbreaking for a defense. You game plan for Embiid, you game plan for Maxey and George, but when Quentin Grimes is out there looking like a premium 3-and-D specialist, the Sixers become incredibly difficult to beat.
Now, let's flip the floor and look at what went wrong for the Boston Celtics, because there is definitely some cause for concern in Massachusetts today.
If you just glance at the raw scoring numbers, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown got theirs. Tatum finished with a monster double-double, 24 points and 16 rebounds. Brown added 22 points. But basketball is not played on a spreadsheet. It is played on hardwood, and efficiency is everything in the playoffs. Tatum shot 8 of 19 from the field. Brown shot 9 of 23 and only hit 1 three-pointer. It was a laborious, grinding performance for the Jays. They were settling for heavily contested isolation jumpers rather than generating the beautiful flowing ball movement that defines their offense when they are at their best.
But the biggest red flag for Joe Mazzulla and his staff is what happened to their supporting cast. The entire identity of this Celtics team is built on the premise that they have no weak links. They overwhelm you with versatile, two-way players who can all dribble, pass, and shoot. Last night, the Sixers defense completely neutralized that depth. Look at Derek White. White is usually the barometer for the Celtics' success. When he is aggressively attacking closeouts and hitting his floaters, Boston is virtually unbeatable. In Game 5, the Sixers locked him in a cage. He finished with just 6 points on 2 of 8 shooting, was a -14, and looked entirely uncomfortable dealing with the length of Paul George and Kelly Oubre on the perimeter. Peyton Pritchard gave them 12 points off the bench, but Sam Hauser was hunted defensively and finished a -21 in his 20 minutes. The Sixers made a very conscious tactical decision. They decided they were not going to let the Boston role players beat them. They stayed attached to the shooters. They fought over screens with incredible urgency, and they essentially dared Tatum and Brown to beat them in isolation against set defenders. And in Game 5, that strategy worked to absolute perfection. So, what does this all mean as we look at the bigger picture and prepare for Game 6? The series is now 3-2. The Boston Celtics still hold the mathematical advantage, but the psychological pressure has violently shifted. Closing out a series is always the hardest thing to do, but failing to close it out at home and now having to travel back to a hostile environment, that is how doubts start to creep in. The Celtics know they have a Game 7 in their back pocket if they need it, but the absolute last thing you want to do is play a Game 7 against a desperate team with a superstar like Joel Embiid who just found his rhythm. Boston has to figure out a way to get their secondary scorers involved. They have to find ways to make Embiid work harder on the defensive end, perhaps by putting him in more pick-and-roll actions in space rather than letting him anchor the paint. For the Philadelphia 76ers, they have found a blueprint to survival. They are heading back to the Wells Fargo Center, and that building is going to be an absolute madhouse. The momentum is entirely on their side. They prove to themselves that they can execute down the stretch. They prove they can withstand the Boston runs. And they prove that their big three of Embiid, Maxey, and George can collectively out-execute the Celtic stars when their backs are against the wall. Game 6 is going to be an absolute bloodbath. It is going to be physical, it is going to be toxic, and it is going to be everything we love about NBA playoff basketball. Can the Sixers defend their home court and force one of the most highly anticipated Game 7s in recent history? Or will the Celtics regain their composure, weather the storm, and finally put the nail in the coffin?
I genuinely cannot wait to find out.
I want to hear from you guys down in the comments. What was your biggest takeaway from Joel Embiid's performance last night? Was this the defining game of the Paul George era in Philly so far? And on the Boston side, what is the one adjustment Joe Mazzulla has to make to ensure they don't have to play a Game 7? Drop your thoughts, your predictions, and your X's and O's breakdowns down below. As always, if you appreciate the deep dive, the lack of hot takes, and the real basketball analysis, make sure you hit that like button to help out the channel. Subscribe if you are new around here, and I will catch you guys in the next video after Game 6. Peace.